Hello, everyone. We appreciate your patience and being here today for our webinar. We're just going to wait a few seconds. We had a few technical issues, but those have been worked out, and so we will get started here shortly. Just letting everyone join. We're getting our numbers where we kind of expect them, and then we'll get started. Okay. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Responsible Mohair Standards in Action. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to enter your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered afterward via email. Now on to Hannah Deans with Textile Exchange. Hannah?
Thank you, Rose. And thank you to all the participants, and thanks for your patience while we iron out our technical problems. My name is Hannah Deans. I'm a Senior Standards Manager at Textile Exchange, and I'm going to be introducing the Responsible Mohair Standard and giving a little bit of an update on where we are so far and how the standard works, and to also talk about the Responsible Animal Fiber Standard framework that it's a part of. Rather than going into a deep dive of the standard and what it covers, I'm going to signpost two resources that address those points, as the main focus of today's webinar is really to hear about the adoption of the standard from the industry. So with us today to share their insights and updates, we have Lindsay Humphreys, who's General Manager and Head of Sustainability at Mohair South Africa, Isak Stats, General Manager at BKB, and Anthony Kirsten, Managing Director at Stoken. And they're going to tell us about RMS adoption across the industry and at farm level and from the processing perspective. But to start with, I'll talk a little bit about the standard. The RMS is a voluntary global standard that addresses the welfare of Angora goats and the land that they graze on. And for background, as I'm sure most people are aware by now, the Responsible Wool Standard was released in 2016. And when we started developing that standard, there was a discussion within the working group about the scope. And the decision was taken that in the initial phase to focus on sheep's wool only, but with a view to extending it at a later date. In response to stakeholder requests, we started the work of creating the Responsible Mohair Standard in 2018. But rather than creating a separate standalone standard, we worked also to create an umbrella framework that we could use to connect the two species standards, as well as to lay the foundation for the possibility of adding in further species scopes in the future. So this development process took about 18 months. So that covered the revision of the RMS, the revision of the Responsible Wool Standard and the development of the RMS. And we finished the work and released the RMS in March 2020. The objectives of the RMS are familiar to those that are familiar with the RWS, as they are identical. So it's to ensure animal welfare is obviously a core focus, so to ensure that the fiber comes from animals that haven't been subjected to any unnecessary harm. The principle is also to reward and influence the industry to have strong animal welfare and land management practices, and then update with version 2 of the RWS and with the RMS is also the introduction of social welfare requirements at the farm level. The standard also aims to provide a robust chain of custody system from farm right through to final product. And it being a global standard, it also aims to create an industry benchmark to drive improvements where needed and to be globally applicable across a range of farming systems. But as I said at the beginning, we're going to focus on hearing the news from the industry. So I'm not going to talk in great detail about everything that the standard covers. For those that are interested in learning more, we have got a page on our website with more information about the standard. And I would say that the best resource really, if you're interested in the detail, is the user manual, as that contains all the requirements as well as additional context and guidance that's really helpful. So the way that the standard is structured is that the farm requirements are contained in the standard document. So the requirements concerning animal welfare, land management, and social welfare. And then the chain of custody requirements are set out in the content claim standard. And that's something that is in common across all of the textile exchange standards. So as you can see in this chart here, textile exchange has a family of standards covering everything from organic and recycled down, wool, and now mohair. They all follow the same approach when it comes to chain of custody. So the requirements are contained within the content claim standard. Where things differ a little bit with the RMS and the RWS is that with the introduction of the Responsible Animal Fiber Framework, we combined the supply chain certification into one as an effort to make adoption easier throughout the supply chain. So the way that this will work in practice, so our policy for transitioning away from RWS to RAF, is that at the farm level, there are still going to be separate scope certificates for responsible wool and responsible mohair, but a farm or a farm group may hold both. In the supply chain, by 2021, RAF scope certificates will be replacing RWS scope certificates. Under these scope certificates, it would be possible to have both RWS and RMS products, but it's one audit, one scope certificate, one set of fees. However, I just want to highlight that labeling is kept separate. This was a big discussion within the international working group, but the decision was taken to keep the product labels separate. And within that, an RWS product may contain non-RMS mohair and other non-wool animal fibers, but it can't contain non-RWS wool. And the same works for the RMS. So an RMS product may contain non-RWS wool, but it can't contain any non-RMS mohair. I'll come back to labeling in a little bit with a little bit more detail. Just wanted to highlight another thing that we won't be covering in detail on today's webinar. Our other In Action series have been focused around the sort of most common questions we get around certification. You know, how long does it take? How much does it cost? How do I find a certified supplier? But I wanted to just signpost that we have recently released an updated brand and retailer certification toolkit that contains answers to most of these questions. So for those that are disappointed that we're not going into that, I would recommend having a look at that. And we have also released an updated one specifically for suppliers as well, that goes into more detail about the actual process of becoming certified in the supply chain. And another resource I'd like to signpost to is that with adding in Responsible Mohair Standard to the family of standards at Textile Exchange, we are also working on creating more resources and educational material specifically around, obviously around the standard, but also about mohair as a fiber. So it's a sneak preview of the material summary for Responsible Mohair that is going to be added to our library of material summaries. For those that are not familiar with our material summaries, they're a member benefit that provides a brief overview, a high-level overview of the key sustainability attributes and performance and processing attributes of a wide range of materials. So we're really pleased to be adding that to the suite of summaries that we have available. And the other resource that we're adding is an RMS brand sourcing guide. This covers some of those essential, specifically for brands and retailers that are interested in sourcing RMS. So it covers some of the key steps to go through, really. Step number one being to make a commitment, followed by setting a target. And I think in relation to a very recently released standard, a key thing to consider when it comes to target setting is the time that it will take for a standard to be implemented and for the material to move through the chain. And also in particular with an animal fiber, where we have to then factor in the impact on timing from the shearing cycle as well. But this, we will hear more about timelines, I'm sure, from Isaac later on. The next step really is to work with your supply chain, communicate your needs, qualities and quantities, and to work with the supply chain, and also working on the certification. So this is where the RAF approach comes in helpful, in that the suppliers that are currently RWS certified will be able to just add the RMS certification to their scope certificate without the need for an additional on-site audit during this transition period. And I just come back to the claims and labeling aspects in a little bit more detail to that last point around communication. So a key point to be aware of is that there's two types of claims that we categorize it into. One is general marketing claims, and then there's product specific claims. To make a product specific claim, each step of the supply chain needs to be certified up to the seller in the final business to business transaction. So the timeline for having all of that in place and for the certified material to flow through the supply chain can be quite long. It's a long process to get to the point of putting an actual logo on a product. However, during I'll come back to that. During that transition process, general marketing claims can also be really valuable. So whilst developing and implementing an RMS sourcing strategy, it's possible to make claims about your policy, your commitments, your targets, and any activities that you're undertaking to support the industry in the process of adopting the standard. So I've included some examples of general marketing claims that would be permitted on the slide here. And for those that have been following the process that we're going through with the update to our claims policy and our claims framework, commitment claims is definitely an area that we are looking at more, and that we will be formalizing a little bit more. But I just wanted to be sure to highlight that this opportunity for communicating your engagement is also available. And with that, I will now hand over to Lindsay, who's going to be giving us an update from the industry perspective.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, it's Lindsay. We really do appreciate this opportunity today to provide an update from the mohair industry. Next slide, Hannah. So for the benefit of those that are perhaps new to the mohair conversation, I do see a lot of familiar names, but also unfamiliar names. I'll provide some context and background. So Mohair South Africa is situated in Nelson Mandela Bay in South Africa. The reason our HQ is situated here is because half the world's mohair is farmed in the Eastern and Western Cape of South Africa. Further to that, majority of the world's mohair is further processed in South Africa at our 2 processing plants. And we're a small team of 10 people, very big building, very small team. We do have a retail store, which you can see on that shop front. Next slide. So to provide some context of how we operate, Mohair South Africa is trust funded along with the South African Mohair Growers Association and the Mohair Empowerment Trust. We work very closely together and support each other's functions. What makes it quite interesting and effective as an industry is we're represented by our value chain. So we have members from ram breeders, our Farm Workers Association, our Farmers Association, brokers, buyers, and processors are represented on our boards and bodies. And this really does enable efficient decision taking, especially when you need to be quick and move ahead quite swiftly. Thank you. So as an industry, our core focus is to ensure ethical and responsible practices on farms in South Africa, and we do this through education and empowerment. Our goal is to be trusted as the world's leading producer and supplier of the best quality mohair farmed in systems implementing ethical, sustainable, and traceable practices. Next slide. So a little bit of history and context is in 2009, the industry saw a need to introduce production guidelines into our farming systems. It was a very slow uptake. Our farmers didn't understand very well what we were trying to achieve. And it took a couple of years for this really to take off. And it was, you can see that is edition 6, that was our final edition. We went through many processes and consulted with animal welfare experts, Green Choice, and our value chain to ensure that this production guideline was updated and effective. It's actually a really good standard for those, and many of you on this group have actually gone through these guidelines in much detail. It's a really solid set of guidelines with the biggest difference, and Isa can talk to this a little later, the biggest difference that I've picked up is the record keeping and documenting. So as of 2018, 2019, we were 97% audited on these production guidelines, which is a really good number in our industry. But then we further saw the need in 2018 to introduce a standard rather than a guideline, and one that offers assurance along the value chain and not just in South Africa. So as an industry, we chose to partner with Textile Exchange and support the development of the Responsible Mohair Standard. The standard was launched on the 17th of March this year, and we are very excitedly implementing the standard on the ground. Thank you. So the role of Mohair South Africa has changed substantially over the last 2 years. Mohair South Africa were custodians of the sustainable guidelines and had internal sustainability department that was auditing farms based on those sustainable guidelines and then issuing assurance certificates to our clients. That role has now moved over to the brokers, and Mohair South Africa is no longer auditing any farms. But what we are doing is offering a support system to industry in the implementation of the RMS. Thank you. Next slide. So in our education on the ground, we really did see a need to offer refresher courses back to industry to ensure that the adoption of the RMS was successful. The industry, we actually have Dr. Mackie Hobson on this call today as well. The industry appointed an industry specialized veterinarian many years ago. I stand corrected, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And Dr. Hobson has been an incredible resource to our farming community. As an industry, we offer free consultation, free advice from Dr. Hobson to all our producers, all our 1,000 producers across the country. I won't go through the list. You can read on the screen what all the services that he offers, but he really has been an integral part of our team, and specifically in the development of our education program. On the next slide. So the development of the Responsible Mohair Standard started 2 years ago. And as an industry, we felt that we weren't going to sit back and wait for the standard to be launched before we implemented any sort of support system. So we introduced an educational program, a structured educational program across our producing communities for farm workers. And we introduced posters, manuals, and videos in various languages that suit our farm workers. And our Growers Association are moving around the country and offering these courses. They do 1 or 2 of those topics at a time. And once the farm workers have gone through a practical course, so if it's handling, the farm workers actually at the end of that course have to handle that Angora goat correctly. And once they have done so and gone through their refresher course, they would get a certificate handed to them, and a copy of that certificate would then be added into the RMS file. This has been a really positive uptake. I think if you go to the next slide, there's a picture of how many farm workers we see per day, and really excited to get out, excited to be engaged with. And don't get me wrong, these farm workers are being trained on their farms. They always have been. But to come together into one common space and to understand the minimum requirement for best practice, and more importantly, the why. Why do we do things the way that we do? And why do we not do things the way that we possibly have seen in the past? It really has been a successful program. Next slide, Hannah. This is just an example of that practical training. So at the end of a handling course, they would have to handle an animal slowly, gently, and explain the process and make sure that they are showing that they understand that particular course. Next slide, Hannah. So I'm not going to hold you up any further. I think that you are itching to hear from the broker and processor. But what I do want to say is, as an industry, we're trying to stay as effectively communicative as possible. So anyone that isn't on our brand retailer database for updates, please just email me at any time. You can be added to that. We won't spam you. It's once every second week. And it really is just what has happened in the last 2 weeks and where are we now. You're most welcome to email me directly with any specific questions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was a great overview. And without any further ado, I shall hand over to Isak.
Thank you, Anna. As my name is Isak Stas, I'm the General Manager of BKB in South Africa. And just on the next slide, as an introduction to our company, we are a wool broker, a wool and mohair broker, which means that we basically work with the producers, and we are the infrastructure that makes sure that the wool and the mohair comes into an organized marketing system. We conduct the internal audits for RMS and RWS. We are then third party checked by a control union. We do audits for other standards as well. So RWS and RMS are our main standards that we work on, but we also work for Organica and ZQ. And as a company, we are ISO certified for 9,000 and 14,000, which just, and we need to add this into the conversation, just that we are qualified to do what we are doing in the farms. I thought that maybe before we talk about, from my point of view, or from the broker's point of view, I would put one of my producers, give him a word. His name is Chris Hobson, and he will just tell you about his experience with working with RMS and RWS.
Then I think it's not very onerous at all. You know, I think the fundamental difference to complying with the standard is that we're doing the exact same management practices that we've been doing for generations with my dad, my grandfather. The only difference now is that we've got to have to document these processes and production systems. So that's, you know, it's not that onerous because you need to keep stock records anyway. And I found making use of technology like AgriWeb has obviously made it a whole lot easier. But it hasn't brought anything new to what we've been doing. It's in fact made things a lot easier because we've done away with the pocket book and the little pieces of paper that get handed to you every evening by the staff when they've done certain things, animal husbandry practices and whatever. They now use a WhatsApp and they send a WhatsApp to me and it's documented in AgriWeb. So the only massive difference is the record keeping. For the rest, we've been, the management practices have stayed exactly the same. We haven't changed the way we farm with goats. All we do is we're telling a story every year of what we're doing. And it's documented for anybody to be able to see what we're doing. So it creates a transparency, but I think what it's also brought to me is a sense of pride that, you know, we comply with a standard. And yeah, so it's not that onerous. I think for some people, you know, the social responsibility side of things will mean that some people have got to incur a bit of cost in terms of sharers' quarters and maybe, you know, a coat of paint to their staff houses and what have you. But there's no massive expenditure required in order to comply. I certainly don't think so. And anyway, so bottom line is it gives me a sense of pride that I've been able to, that I'm part of a group of people or an industry where we meet a standard.
Okay, you can do the next one as well, Annika.
I've learned as a producer is that RMS is, in fact, it's not about the premium you're going to get for your product, which and we're seeing the premium. It's evident right now, but it's in the near future. It's the sustainable route to market, complying with the RMS standard. It's like the fruit industry years and years before us. The fruit producers, in order to sell their product on international markets, had to comply with a minimum standard. And that's no different now in the mohair industry. We've got a niche product that finds its way onto niche markets. So complying with the RMS standard means we're securing our route to those niche markets and allowing us to be able to sell our product across the world rather than just to a particular market.
Thanks, Anna. Next slide. Okay, so what's been happening? We have a total of 133 producers already certified. Another 78 have been audited, but still have outstanding non-conformances. But we've been focusing on our bigger producers because obviously we want to create a certain momentum and for the market to be able to adopt the standard, because obviously before you can start selling that into your market, you need to know how much you have available to sell. Currently, as things currently stand, we will be bringing around about 1 million kilograms into the market. This coming year, we are full-time auditing. So this is where we're currently at, but we are adding at least 2 farmers every day at the moment. So we are making very quick progress in auditing the farmers. So maybe just on the next slide, you know, why is it taking so long? And I understand the frustration because we're seeing plenty of requests for certified mohair coming into the market. So the first thing that you have to say is that the standard was only published in March. And right before it was published, we had a hard lockdown in South Africa. So like many companies, COVID, all over the world, COVID slowed us down a bit. The biggest obstacle we find on farms is just adapting to a very formal documenting process. Most farmers don't like paperwork, so this is a whole new way of thinking for them. We have put quite a number of resources towards this problem. We're giving them a full box these days, full of all the necessary documents that they need. When we started with the RWS initially 3-4 years ago, one of the things that made this very attractive for me as a broker was that I think in general South African farmers are following all of the guidelines or all of the rules in the standard. but the main one is documentation, and that's our biggest non-conformance that we find on farms. The other challenge that we have is our communal producers. Now these guys are farming with 30, 40 goats on communal lands. So the standard of paperwork that will be required for currently is way beyond them. Many of them are illiterate. So we are working together with Textile Exchange to find a reasonable or alternative to how we can accommodate them. And if you start thinking about it, these guys, you basically have a herd of already 30, 40 sheep or sheep or goat. So these guys are, in terms of animal welfare, I don't think that you can look much better after an animal than they are looking after them. It's more a question of how do we bring them into this first world paradigm where you have to document everything and have to prove anything. But we are making progress in that. Unfortunately, Lesotho itself is still under lockdown, so we can't travel internationally. And so the work is a bit, we're extending it at the moment, but we will get there. Just next slide. What are the positive side effects? So that's also one of the things that really excites me a lot. We do the standard because it's a market requirement, but because we are showing our producers that this is a very nice standard. It's very doable. And very small things like Chris said. Just give your shed maybe a new coat of paint. So everywhere we're going, we're seeing it. Sometimes I think it's kind of a renewal because the guys are saying, well, they'll spend a bit of money on their shed. They'll neaten things up a bit more than it used to be. The other thing that's very exciting is that other organizations, not in the textile industry, are are realizing that there's value in having a set of documentation available. For example, our Department of Labor in South Africa, which conducts regular farm inspections, now know that when they come to a farm and the farm is RWS certified or RMS certified, he just needs to ask for a full set of documents that's in the ledger, and that's perfect because that's what the law requires. And then also a sense of pride. I like it a lot that these guys feel proud of what they are achieving. We've had a very, very difficult season. The past 4 or 5 years has been very difficult. And even under these circumstances, our producers are changing their systems where it needs to be changed. And that it is nice to take something back to the producers. So just on the next slide, Anna. Anna, if you can do the next slide. Okay, so what will speed up the process? What can we do? Now, one of the things that I think is incredibly healthy is the engagement that we're having from brands. It's nice that brands are coming out of South Africa to come and see for themselves. From the producer's point of view, it's good that these brands that the producer know he's producing for somebody, not just this huge unknown thing sitting overseas somewhere. So the fact that brands now come and say, well, they come and have a look for their own risk management reasons, but the producers like the fact that they are producing for something special, because mohair is something special. Of course, the prices does make a difference, especially now in this adoption phase. It will make a difference. I don't think it will last forever, but at the moment it is there, and we are really grateful for that, and that gives a bit of extra momentum in it. The other thing that I'm seeing is just acknowledgement, and we are going from our side. We are going through a whole lot of things to make sure that when somebody passes his audit, we phone him and we congratulate him and we send him a certificate. And I think the further we can take this down the value chain to say, well, you are appreciated. Thank you for the trouble that you're going through. That's the kind of positive feeling that you would want to create. I also think that in terms of how the market is structured, the thing that we are seeing is changing is that everybody down the value chain is starting to think a bit longer term, not just the next season or the next clip, but we need to invest from the producer side. He needs to invest for a long-term future for his product, but also from the brand side, you know, investing back, even if it's just time into understanding how the process works on the farms. Next slide, Hannah. Okay, so just in summary, we are auditing at a good speed. It is a quality process. It's not a quantity process. That's the one thing that I have to be very, very clear about. When somebody's passed an audit with us, he's passed an audit. There's no shortcuts. It is taking a bit of time, but we are nearly 40% of the clip. Next week's auction, about 36% of the clip will be certified Mohair. And I think before the end of next year, we should be most of the Mohair in South Africa should be certified. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Isak. That's phenomenal progress that's been made under quite challenging circumstances. So it's incredibly impressive. And just to before moving on, just to pick up on your comments around the documentation, and I think that's something that we've seen through the adoption of the RWS in every single region. It is the documentation requirement is the most common non-conformities across the board, but then we also get that positive feedback of some of the benefits from implementing the changes. But just to add on the point around the communal producers, that we are working on that alternative approach, and we have got a protocol developed where the audits would shift the focus away from the individual farmers' records to an animal-based welfare assessment. So it's a slightly different approach to assurance, but I'm very much looking forward to us being able to pilot that once the travel restrictions are eased off. So yeah, there is that to look forward to. But I will now hand over to Anthony Kirsten from Stucken, who will share their perspective from the processes.
Thank you, Hannah, and good day, I think, to everybody. There's some people in the mornings and some in the afternoons and perhaps some in the evenings as well. So hello, everybody. I don't have a slide presentation to put on the screen today because I thought as a processor, I'd talk briefly from a slightly bigger picture perspective, perhaps about RMS. I represent the Mohair buyers and processors in South Africa, and we are from what you might call the missing middle section of the industry, which are the people who sit between the farmer and the grower and ultimately the brand. In other words, we are part of the process of getting this exquisite raw material into a usable form to the market ultimately. I'd just like to start off with by reiterating what Isak has alluded to in his presentation that we've just seen, and what Hannah said about how, in our opinion, remarkable the progress has been in adopting this RMS standard in South Africa. If we look at how that compares to the adoption of other standards around the world, and our closest experience from my own personal perspective is the Responsible Wool Standard, and how the adoption of that standard has taken quite a long time in Australia and of course also in South Africa. When one has a look at how the mohair industry and the growers in particular have adopted the standard, I think the progress is extraordinary, quite frankly. When Isak talks about in the next 12 months approximately 1 million kilos of RMS mohair coming to the market, that represents approximately 40% of the entire clip. So I think that puts it into perspective. However, I think therein, and I think Isaac's final point today was one that I wanted to stress particularly, is that this process of RMS in South Africa is a quality process. In other words, the whole point of why we are doing this is that when we want to be sure that when we say we are doing something, we are actually doing it. And we want our clients and ultimately the brands to have comfort in the knowledge that when we say we do something, we actually are doing it on the ground. And I think that takes sometimes a little bit longer to bed down and make sure it gets done properly. But I think the industry from the get-go decided that if we're going to do this, let's do it properly, so that we set the right foundation and the right culture and mindset with us. So having said that, I think one of the biggest challenges that we are currently facing from a commercial perspective, and of course, we as the buyers in the process are essentially funding the mohair industry and financing it from the get-go to buy mohair, hold it, process it, and ultimately move it on through the supply chain, is that it will take a little bit longer than maybe everybody would like. And I think that for us is probably the biggest challenge, is to try to manage the expectations of the brands, ultimately your clients also, and the spinners, the knitters, the weavers, the garment makers in the supply chain, to manage the expectation of what is realistically possible in terms of RMS, in terms of getting commercial volume to the market, and how do we make sure that we support the industry in the transition to become, hopefully, overwhelmingly an RMS focused industry. When you think about Isaac's comment of 1 million kilos coming to market in the next 12 months, we should remember that those 1 million kilos have to be divided up over 15 micron categories and into approximately 40 to 45 different types or grades. So you can see very quickly how 1 million kilos gets diluted into very small quantities per specific type or grade that a spinner might require from us. And a spinner might require 4 or 5 different grades of mohair from us in order to deliver his collection of mohair yarns to the market. So I think as a processor, we've done a lot of work in South Africa, and I know that our competitor has done the same, to try and arrive at a point where we can have the smallest possible commercial batch sizes to process, because we are dealing with a luxury niche fiber, so we can't produce hundreds of thousands of kilos in a batch. But at the end of the day, we are in a manufacturing process, and I would suggest that probably the minimum commercial processing batch sizes that are doable in our processing facilities, not just ours, but our competitors, are anything between 3,000 or 4,000 kilos for the super fine luxury kid mohair, and up to about 10,000 kilos for the coarser mohair. Obviously, the bigger the batch size, the better from an efficiency point of view and a costing point of view. But I think realistically, those are the kinds of batch sizes that we have to talk about. When we talk about a minimum batch size, say of 3,000 kilos, we have to understand that approximately 40 to 45 producers are involved in that tiny little batch. And that just goes to try to explain the complexity of collecting this RMS mohair from specific certified growers and so in sufficient quantities in the correct grade with the right quality and length and micron, etc., in order to be able to produce a minimum sized RMS batch. And I think that therein lies one of the biggest challenges I think we have as an industry, is to try to deliver to the brands an RMS product, but with the expectation that it will take some time before we are able to deliver genuine commercial quantities on a regular basis into the market. At the moment, we are discussing with our spinner clients the first RMS possibilities for delivery in early 2021. And obviously they subsequently will have their own lead times in terms of spinning the yarn and ultimately knitting and weaving. I think it's also critical for all of us to understand that we do have, and Lindsay alluded to it earlier, a very comprehensive sustainable mohair guideline standard in South Africa, which most of the growers have adhered to for a number of years already. And I think it's essential for us to all remember that if a mohair grower is not RMS certified, it does not mean that his mohair is not sustainable. What it means is he hasn't complied with the RMS standard yet. And I think because we've got this certified standard from Mohair South Africa in the market and have had since in various iterations since 2009, the vast majority of mohair in South Africa is grown in a sustainable way. And it's for that reason that Mohair South Africa developed this sustainable mohair standard and accreditation a few years back. And I think we would appeal to all the users of mohair to support the transition of this industry over the next 12 months as we grow the commercial quantities of RMS, by continuing to support also the non-RMS mohair, which is grown in a sustainable way. Because at the end of the day, if 40% of the clip is RMS in a year's time, it does mean that 60% still is not RMS. And in order to keep the mohair industry intact, we have to find a way to convert for the grower his mohair ultimately into cash. It sounds a little bit crass, but at the end of the day, that is what is required in order for him to sustain his farm and his livelihood and his staff. And the same goes for us as processors, and I'm sure the spinners and the weavers and the knitters would agree with that. So that really for me is the point that I wanted to make in this discussion today, is that it's going to take a little while, but I think we are on the right track. And as I said right at the beginning, I think at the end of the day, the progress has been remarkable. And I think the support that we've had from the brands over the last sort of 18 months during this process has been terrific. And the fact that we have had many of the brands visiting South Africa has, as Isak said, exposed all of us to another part of the industry which maybe we weren't exposed to enough, and has given us a very clear understanding that at the end of the day, we have to meet the market demand, which is clearly for a sustainable product. And I think the mohair industry is a long way towards that. The processors in South Africa are already RMS certified, and I think we are ready to go. All we need now is the time to collect sufficient quantity of RMS mohair as it comes on stream to be able to bring commercial volumes to the market. So Hannah, that's my story from the processors, and I hope that is reasonably well understood, and obviously I'm open to questions.
Great, thank you very much, Anthony. It was really helpful to get the perspective of the commercial realities, and that especially the timelines that need to be factored into RMS sourcing strategies and target settings, because obviously whilst the adoption has been off the charts phenomenal. You don't come at the entire supply overnight, and there is that need to support the transition process. I thought I would just finish up before we go to questions, Rose, with I just pulled out some of the lessons learned from RWS in terms of the experience there from the past few years of brands sourcing RWS wool, and for RWS wool supply chains to be built up. And some of the sort of the key messages that we've had from brands that have been going through this. So I think the point around building connections around the supply chain and that collaboration is key. And I think this is a really nice one for mohair, with it being a niche fiber and a very well organized supply chain, and quite often the textile industry is very complicated and opaque, but the opportunities for getting to know the entire supply chain and getting to know the producers and the animals is there. So it's a huge benefit. The other aspect around setting long-term goals and communicating those, and here to Anthony's point, factoring in the commercial realities and the time it is going to take to roll out the adoption into those long-term goals. As Isak talked about the price, and I think the importance as well of obviously with our standards, we don't get involved in the commercial aspects and price premiums, but our advice is always to work with the supply chain partners to manage the price impact. So forward commitments and volume commitments are things that are helpful. And again, another point in relation to transition, and that we are, this isn't a sort of a commodity. We're starting something and building it. So start small and scale. And to lead and not follow. Obviously, with the animal fibers, there is this consumer demand for assurance and verification, much more than we see on any of the other preferred fibers and materials in the textile industry. But it's really about preempting that and creating the demand, which we're also really happy to see the support from the brands for the work, but also all the work of the mohair industry. So I will just stop there and see if we have any questions, Rose. I think we've got a few minutes left.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left before the end of the hour for the webinar. One question that came in, Hannah, is regarding the information that not all farms will be delivering as early as 2021, are referring to greasy wool.
My understanding is that maybe Isak is better placed to answer that one, but where the commitment was, that how much of the clip by 2021? Isak, would you be able to answer that?
The plan is to have the whole clip certified by end of 2021.
Okay.
We are talking about greasy mohair. Wool is a I don't think we'll ever get to 100% in the wool, but we're talking about greasy mohair certainly.
Okay, great.
Hannah, if I can just maybe add to that from a commercial point of view, obviously the major brands and consumer countries are in the Northern Hemisphere, and we are sitting here at the bottom of the world in the Southern Hemisphere. So just very roughly, there's probably a 3 to 4 month timeline from when we are able to purchase greasy mohair until we can get the process top to the door of the spinner in Europe. It will probably take 3 to 4 months. So there is a bit of a lead time over and above when this mohair comes to market. And I think that's in a way a little bit my point that I made earlier. We just have to be aware of those kinds of timelines. And we are already buying RMS mohair. It's just that the quantities are still quite small, and we expect that they'll grow as a percentage of each auction as we go along. But the numbers are still quite small, but we expect them, as I said, to accelerate quite quickly.
Great, thank you. And in the sourcing guide that I mentioned at the start, we factor in some of those points, the things that to consider in terms of the timelines that are specific to the fiber. So that's a very good point.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question is, how does South Africa's progress in adopting the RMS compare to other producer countries?
Well, South Africa is definitely leading the way. There is interest from other countries. I would say that we are held back somewhat from progress by the fact that we released the standard on the 17th of March, and most of the world went into lockdown the following week. But there is, I'm aware of interest and some efforts towards certification in other countries, and that's in addition to the work that we mentioned previously around adapting the assurance protocol for making the standard suitable in the Lesotho context. But I don't know if you've got anything else to add, Isak, here.
No, we many of those countries send their mohair to South Africa as well. So Lesotho being the biggest one of those. And the problem is basically the same in all the other countries. I think in South Africa we're the only country that has really big commercial farmers that and all the other countries. England, for example, it's really small producers. So, but all of them are interested. We've just been focusing around our own home, and we are advising them on how to get compliant.
Great, thank you for that. Another follow-up, perhaps, regarding the information that not all farms will be certified at the same time. Some farms will need more time, etc. At the same time, as brands, we would like to show that we want to support their process. Is it possible to have information that is geared to highlight the positive steps that an uncertified farmers are taking in action aiming to be certified?
That's a great question, and I think this is where in terms of external communication, there is possibility of general marketing claims and communications around the support of farmers in transition. And then there is obviously the opportunity and the possibilities for brands to work directly with the supply chain and supporting the process that way. But in terms of sourcing both certified and non-certified, the only barrier is the limitations around product claims on actual product. But hopefully the general marketing claims, this is something that will be useful for allowing brands to talk about their support.
And if I can add to you, it's interesting when the first RWS clothes were sold in England. One of my employees was in England at the time, and she brought back a lovely wool sweater with the RWS swing tag in it. And I posted that tag on our Facebook page. Now we've got about 30,000 members on our company Facebook page, and we saw an immediate spike in people. Before that, it's a slow process of adoption. But the moment we got that marketing message out there, and the fact that look at this, look at how nice it looks, and look at again the appreciation that you're getting from the retail industry, our orders just spike incredibly. So, and that's what gave us the momentum to really go big.
Great, thank you for that. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please feel free to type it now. We are coming to the top of the hour and we'll answer one more question, but any unanswered questions will be answered directly via email. So please feel free to do that, and then we will be able to respond to you one-on-one as follow-up. So with the final question for today, can you clarify the difference between the Responsible Animal Framework and the Animal Welfare Framework?
Okay, great. So the Animal Welfare Framework is the tool that we use to align the animal welfare standards. So basically it takes the desired outcomes that is associated with each section of the animal welfare module of the RWS. It extracts the principles for each of the categories covered by that. So basically the Animal Welfare Framework is a big Excel spreadsheet with desired outcomes, principles for each category and subcategory, and then all the topics. So it's like a benchmarking tool that we use to calibrate the standards, to make sure that where we make a change, because one species has got a different need, we're still aligning at a principle level. It's probably becoming more useful now that we're looking at alpacas. There are more differences because it was actually quite straightforward between sheep and goats, with them having very similar animal welfare needs. The Responsible Animal Fiber Framework Standard is a part of our standard system at Textile Exchange. So it's what we're using to combine the certification in the supply chain, so that it becomes so that a mill doesn't have to become certified separately to the Responsible Mohair Standard and separately to the Responsible Wool Standard, so that they're certified one time, but then they can process certified mohair and certified wool and make claims on that, the different certified materials. So that's so the Responsible Animal Fiber Standard Framework covers everything, and it's what we're using to structure the assurance systems under. But the Animal Welfare Framework is just specifically around how we make sure we're aligned in how we approach animal welfare in the standards, so that we're not, basically so that we don't set the bar at different levels for different species, so that we have that consistency. I hope that was clear enough. It's a complicated topic.
Well, I appreciate our speakers today, and thank you all for participating, and especially hanging in there with us as through our technical difficulties, but we were happy that you were able to join us today. Again, just as a friendly reminder that all unanswered questions will be answered via email, and an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.